Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you 7 photos that might look completely normal at first glance, but behind each one is an extremely disturbing story, and I'm going to tell you the story behind every single photo. The first photo is this picture of an airplane. This happened back in 1970. There was a teenage boy named Kid Safford who loved traveling all over the world. His parents actually allowed him to travel, but eventually he started wanting to go even farther. At one point, he began running away from home on a regular basis just so he could travel wherever he wanted. His parents constantly had to go out and search for him and bring him back home. Eventually, they had no choice but to send him to a boarding school so the school could keep an eye on him. But after just 2 weeks, he still managed to escape. While he was running away, he eventually made his way to an airport. The airport he arrived at that day looked like this. This was Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport in Australia. And back then, airport security wasn't nearly as strict as it is today, so people could actually sneak into restricted areas. When Kid arrived at the airport, he went over to the landing gear of an airplane. The airplane he approached that day was this type of aircraft. And right next to the landing gear, there was a small empty space. It was just large enough for a person to squeeze into. And that's exactly what he did. He went over to the landing gear and climbed inside. A little while later, the airplane he had climbed into began taking off. There was also a man at the airport that day named John Gilpin. He was a photographer and he had come to the airport because he wanted to take pictures of a few airplanes. About a week later, he returned home and looked through the photos he had taken. And there was one photo that absolutely terrified him. It was this one. And actually, what I just showed you was only part of the photo. Here's the full picture. As you can see, there is a person falling out of the airplane. And that person was Kid Safford. He had climbed inside the airplane's landing gear, but unfortunately, he fell out. At the time, he was believed to have fallen from an altitude of around 60 meters, making survival almost impossible. And even if he hadn't fallen out of the landing gear that day, he still could have died from a lack of oxygen or from the extremely cold temperatures as the airplane climbed higher. So climbing into an airplane's landing gear is almost impossible to survive once the plane has taken off. The second photo is this picture of David Johnson. This photo is connected to the story of a man named David Johnson. Ever since college, he had been extremely interested in geology. After graduating, he worked in the field of volcano research, and he was considered one of the best in his field. In 1980, there was a volcano in southwestern Washington state. The volcano was called Mount St. Helens. At the time, there were several earthquakes occurring around the volcano. David was studying and working near the area as well, so as soon as he heard about the earthquakes, he went there and set up a small station so he could study the volcano. Mount St. Helens looked like this. This is an image taken from the exact area where David was located. After some time, the volcano began producing a steam eruption. This was a sign that things inside the volcano had become extremely hot, causing water to rapidly turn into steam. It was also a warning sign that the volcano was about to erupt. And not long after that, the volcano finally erupted. This is a photo taken right when the eruption happened. It was absolutely massive. Immediately after the eruption, huge amounts of ash were released, and there were also massive amounts of rock and dirt sliding down the volcano, almost like a landslide. When this landslide happened, it completely wiped out the forest below. The air was filled with ash. Let me show you another image of the volcano. You can see that there was a huge forest down below. But after the volcano erupted, it looked like this. There was almost not a single tree left. The people living nearby were also surrounded by extremely polluted air filled with ash, making it impossible to breathe. The volcanic eruption destroyed around 200 homes. Near the volcano was a lake called Spirit Lake. The lake became filled with huge numbers of tree trunks and branches because the landslide pushed massive amounts of trees into the lake. The eruption also killed around 57 people. That number could have been in the hundreds or even thousands, but David and several other researchers had warned people to evacuate the area before the eruption, which helped reduce the number of casualties. And this is the famous photo of David Johnson, taken just one day before the volcano erupted. David was also one of the 57 people who died in the eruption. The third photo is this picture of people lying in bed. This is a story with a spiritual and paranormal element to it, and it begins with a man named Marshall Applewhite. One day, he met a woman named Bonnie Nettles. From the moment he met her, he claimed that their meeting was a destined encounter because he believed meeting her was a signal sent to him by extraterrestrial beings. Nettles was a nurse, but she was also deeply interested in spirituality. She also felt that their meeting was somehow meant to happen. Both of them already had families, but they decided to leave their families behind and be together. Their relationship wasn't exactly a romantic couple. Instead, they were more like spiritual companions who shared the same beliefs. Both of them believed in a spiritual movement connected to UFOs. They believed that one day, a UFO would arrive and take the chosen people away. These people would supposedly be taken to another world where they could continue living on a higher level of existence than human beings. The two of them began spreading these beliefs to many other people. Eventually, they gathered a group of several dozen followers who shared the same UFO-based spiritual beliefs. At this point, they named their group Heaven's Gate. They believed that one day, a UFO would arrive and take all of them away. In 1985, Nettles suddenly died from cancer. Her death seriously shook the beliefs of the Heaven's Gate group because she had died before the UFO was supposed to arrive. And even after she died, no UFO came to take her away. Applewhite then explained to everyone that although her physical body remained behind, her soul had already been taken away by the UFO. From that point on, the group's beliefs changed somewhat. They believed that if a member of the group died, their soul would still be picked up by the UFO and then placed into another body so they could continue living. Then, in 1997, there was news about a comet called Comet Hale-Bopp. When Applewhite heard about it, he believed that there was a UFO traveling behind the comet. After realizing this, he immediately told the group that it was time to leave because the UFO had arrived. This is a picture of Marshall Applewhite, and these are some of the members of Heaven's Gate. All of them recorded videos in which they talked about their wishes and expressed their thoughts just before they were preparing to leave Earth. The Heaven's Gate group had a total of 39 members. They were divided into 3 groups, and each group took turns entering this house. This was the house they rented to carry out their ritual of leaving Earth. Inside the house, there were many beds. The first group would go to their beds. They would drink a glass of applesauce or eat a pudding that had been mixed with sedatives. Then they would take another sip of vodka. Finally, they would lie down on the bed. Once they were lying down, they would place a plastic bag over their heads until they suffocated and died. After that, the second group would enter, remove the plastic bags, and cover the bodies with purple cloth to respect their privacy. Then they would drink the applesauce and repeat the same actions. Before this happened, several people had already left the Heaven's Gate group. One of those former members received the address of this house. The address had been sent to them by members of Heaven's Gate before they left Earth. When this person entered the house, they saw a scene like this. All of the members had already carried out the ritual of leaving Earth. A total of 39 people were found dead inside the house, including Applewhite. The fourth photo is this picture of a girl at a lake in the area of Miso Hwaship. There is a rather unusual location here, and that is this lake. This is a place that many tourists visit. It's considered unusual because if you look closely, you can see that the lake has a red color. The red color comes from the fact that there used to be a lot of mining activity in this area. Because of that, the lake now contains many substances, including acids and metals left behind from the old mining operations. But there was another horrifying discovery connected to this lake. In 2017, there was a YouTuber named Sir Fun. She traveled to many different places, and one of the places she visited was this red lake. She went there with her boyfriend and took many photos. Her trip went perfectly fine. But what she didn't know was that one of the photos she took contained something extremely disturbing. In 2019, 2 years after Sir Fun visited the lake, something happened at the same location. As I mentioned earlier, there had been a lot of mining activity in this area, so there was an abandoned mine nearby. A tourist went there to explore the mine. When the person went inside, they discovered something horrifying. There was a human body floating in a pool of water. The police later discovered several more bodies in other locations. All of these bodies were connected to a man named Encom Texas. He eventually confessed that he had murdered 7 people. These were 7 women he had killed. He had committed these murders starting in 2016. After killing them, he left their bodies in different locations. 2 of the bodies were placed inside a suitcase, and he threw the suitcase into this lake. Later, the police investigated the case and found the suitcase. Now, let's go back 2 years. This is one of the photos Sarab took when she visited the lake. And in this photo, there is an object floating right here. It was believed to be the suitcase containing human remains. Sarab had unknowingly photographed it 2 years before the killer was arrested. The 5th photo is this picture of the crew. This is a very famous event, and it involves the following story. In 2003, specifically on January 16th, a crew of 7 people was assigned a mission to travel into space for research. This was the spacecraft they used to travel into space. It was the Space Shuttle Columbia. That day, once everyone was inside the spacecraft, it began its launch. The shuttle gradually climbed through the atmosphere and into space. After it had been flying for a while, the solid rocket boosters separated and fell away. The shuttle continued flying for a little longer. Then the external fuel tank was also separated, leaving only the shuttle flying by itself. During the mission, the crew took this photo. They were floating inside the spacecraft in 0 gravity. The shuttle launched on January 16th, 2003, and February 1st was the day they were scheduled to return. During this period, everything went smoothly. But on that day, the Space Shuttle Columbia began its journey back to Earth. Once it entered the atmosphere, the shuttle began experiencing friction with the air, causing its temperature to rise. Everything seemed completely normal until something unexpected happened. The astronauts inside the spacecraft began feeling the temperature rise dramatically, and the temperature was increasing at an extremely abnormal rate. In fact, shortly before launch, there was a piece of foam insulation attached to the shuttle. The impact damaged part of the shuttle's thermal protection system. So when the spacecraft began experiencing friction with the atmosphere, its temperature reached around 1,500 to 1,600 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, once the shuttle entered the atmosphere, it inevitably began to burn. As it burned, the spacecraft started breaking apart, and these were the pieces of the spacecraft as they fell through the atmosphere. The debris was scattered across a huge area, mainly in Texas and Louisiana, and unfortunately, all 7 crew members were unable to survive. The 6th photo is this picture of a prisoner. This was a very controversial event in history, and the story begins like this. In 1971, a job advertisement was posted looking for male college students to participate in a psychological experiment involving life in prison. The participants were offered $15 a day. A total of 24 people participated. They were randomly divided into 2 groups of 12. The first group was assigned to be prisoners, while the second group was assigned to be prison guards. The people chosen to be prisoners were actually arrested by police. Of course, the arrests were fake, but they were done to make the experiment feel more realistic. Once the prisoners entered the prison, they were each given a number and were called by their number instead of their names. The guards, meanwhile, were given complete authority over the prisoners and were instructed to treat them cruelly. On the first day of the experiment, nothing particularly serious happened. But on the second day, things began to go wrong. The prisoners started a rebellion. One of the guards grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at the prisoners. After that, the guards punished the prisoners by making them do push-ups. Sometimes they would force them to do push-ups for no reason at all. They also punished them by denying them access to the bathroom and giving them a bucket to use instead. Over the following days, the punishments became increasingly severe. The guards even forced the prisoners to put bags over their heads. They were also forced to take off their clothes. The experiment was originally supposed to last around 2 weeks, but by the 6th day, everything had become so bad that the experiment had to be stopped. The experiment was conducted by a man named Philip Zimbardo, who was a professor and psychologist. His goal was to demonstrate that a person's natural personality might not be cruel, but when placed in an environment involving certain influences, such as power, they could still become cruel. However, both his conclusion and the experiment itself have been heavily criticized. For example, the participants were not very diverse. There were only 12 prison guards, and all of them were male college students, while real-world populations include people of many different ages. The second issue was that the guards were specifically instructed to be cruel for the purpose of the scientific study. So they may have believed that they were supposed to act cruel in order to contribute to something they considered beneficial. The third issue involves something known as demand characteristics. In other words, the prisoners and guards may have figured out what the researchers expected from them and intentionally behaved in certain ways. Their actual personalities may not have changed at all. There were also many other criticisms. Ultimately, Zimbardo faced significant criticism over the ethical aspects of the experiment. The prisoners who participated in the experiment reportedly suffered severe psychological distress. The 7th photo is this picture of an exorcism. This story involves a girl named Annalise Michel. When she was 16 years old, she began experiencing seizures that caused her body to convulse violently. When her parents discovered what was happening, they immediately took her to the hospital. The doctors told them that she had a mental illness related to schizophrenia. She was treated and took medication for around 4 to 5 years, but her condition didn't improve. At certain times, she would become extremely angry for no apparent reason. She started throwing things around and even eating insects. She also heard many voices inside her head. Sometimes, she claimed to see demonic faces along with many other hallucinations. By 1975 and 1976, given Michel's condition, her parents knew that she had a mental illness, but later they began to reconsider. They thought that perhaps she wasn't mentally ill. Perhaps she was possessed by a demon. From that point on, her parents stopped giving her medication and instead brought in 2 priests to perform exorcisms in an attempt to drive the demon out of her body. Every week, she underwent 1 or 2 exorcism sessions. These are some images from the period when Michel was being exorcised. After some time, her parents noticed that she would simply lie in one place without moving. This was because Michel had undergone a total of 67 exorcism sessions. And throughout this period, she was barely able to eat or drink anything. As a result, her body became extremely weak. Eventually, she died from malnutrition. Michel's story later inspired several movies about exorcism. And the most famous among them was The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which went on to receive several awards. Okay, and those were the 7 stories behind the 7 photos I showed you. If you want to watch more of my videos, you can click on the screen right now. And for now, bye.